There's a strange kind of war that happens in silence, one that isn't fought with words, but with energy. You won't see it in the open, but you'll feel it deep in your bones. It's the war between the empath and the narcissist, between genuine compassion and calculated control. At first glance, it doesn't even look like a war. It looks like connection. It looks like attraction. It looks like two souls drawn together by some invisible gravity. But what's really happening is far more dangerous, far more psychological. It's the moment where an open heart meets an empty one and mistake it for love. The empath is light. The narcissist is mirror. And when light shines upon a mirror, it sees only its own reflection, not realizing the mirror has no substance of its own. This is how the empath's compassion becomes the narcissist's weapon. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what happens when one of those substances has no true essence, only appetite? When one person's heart is a home and the other's is a void that devours? The empath enters the connection believing they found something divine, someone who finally understands their depth, their sensitivity, their soul. The narcissist mirrors it all back perfectly. They mimic warmth with precision. They speak the language of vulnerability fluently. They study the empath's pain the way a predator studies the pattern of its prey. They don't fall in love, they construct an illusion of it. In the beginning, it's intoxicating. The empath feels seen, not just noticed, but understood. They confuse intensity with intimacy, chaos with connection. They call it fate. They say things like, "It's like I've known you forever." But that's the trap, because what feels familiar is often not love. It's recognition. It's the echo of old wounds, the repetition of patterns the soul has yet to heal. The narcissist senses that frequency immediately. They can feel the empath's desire to heal, to nurture, to save, and they weaponize it. They turn the empath's compassion into currency. Every boundary becomes negotiable. Every apology becomes ammunition. Every act of forgiveness becomes proof of their control. The empath keeps giving, believing that love can transform the wound. But love cannot heal what refuses to see itself. The narcissist doesn't want healing, they want fuel. And the empath, driven by compassion, becomes the perfect source. You see, compassion without awareness becomes servitude, and empathy without discernment becomes enslavement. The empath doesn't realize that their greatest strength, the ability to feel deeply, has become their most exploitable weakness. The narcissist knows that emotion is energy, and energy is power. They learn to provoke, withdraw, and manipulate until they own the empath's emotional rhythm completely. It starts subtly a compliment laced with comparison, a joke that cuts a little too deep. They praise your kindness, then question your sanity. They draw you close, then pull away, leaving you desperate to fix whatever invisible fracture they've created. The empath, addicted to harmony, rushes to restore peace, not realizing that this cycle is the very mechanism of control. It's psychological alchemy. The narcissist's insecurity is transmuted into superiority through the empath's constant emotional labor. They drain energy and then criticize the exhaustion they caused. They use the empath's forgiveness to rewrite history, turning betrayal into misunderstanding and manipulation into just love. This is how the empath's compassion becomes the narcissist's weapon. Through guilt, through responsibility, through the illusion that their pain is your fault to heal. Jung said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, their love is lacking." The empath loves. The narcissist craves power. So while one gives everything to keep the connection alive, the other takes everything to feed their illusion of control. But here's the truth that breaks the spell. You cannot heal someone by becoming their host. You cannot love someone into self-awareness. You cannot bleed yourself dry and call it compassion. Real compassion does not destroy you. It refines you. It has boundaries. It knows when to stay, and it knows when to walk away. It does not enable darkness in the name of light. The empath must learn this the hard way. They will give until they are empty, forgive until they are invisible, understand until they forget to exist. And when they finally collapse, when there is nothing left to give, they will look in the mirror and realize they no longer recognize themselves. That moment, that breaking, is the beginning of awakening. It is the moment when the empath's compassion turns inward for the first time, when they stop asking, what is wrong with them, and start asking, what inside me allowed this? It is not self-blame. It is self-awareness. It is the point where empathy matures into discernment, where love stops being sacrifice and becomes sovereignty. Because the truth is this: the empath was never weak. They were powerful, so powerful that they became a source of life for those who could not generate their own, and the narcissist knew it. They saw the empath's light and mistook it for an opportunity to feed. But the empath who awakens becomes the narcissist's undoing, because awareness severs the bond that illusion built. When you see manipulation, it loses its magic. When you name the pattern, it can no longer repeat. When you stop feeding the void collapses. You start to realize that not everyone who needs your help deserves your energy. That love does not mean tolerance of abuse. That compassion does not mean abandoning yourself. That peace sometimes requires distance. And as your awareness grows, so does your power. The same sensitivity that once enslaved you now becomes your sword. You can feel the shift in energy before a word is spoken. You can sense dishonesty in tone, manipulation in silence. And instead of absorbing it, you transmute it. You no longer offer empathy where accountability is required. You no longer confuse potential with reality. You no longer see pain as permission to stay. Your compassion becomes conscious. And conscious compassion cannot be weaponized. Now, when the narcissist tries to provoke, you remain calm. They throw guilt, and you don't absorb it. They demand reaction, and you give stillness. They withhold validation, and you validate yourself, because you have finally remembered. Your love is yours to direct, not theirs to consume. This is the birth of what Jung called individuation, the moment when the self separates from the collective projection and stands in its own light. The empath, once addicted to saving others, becomes devoted to saving truth. Their energy is no longer reactive, it's directive. They stop being mirror and become flame. And that flame changes everything. It burns away the illusion of helplessness. It burns away the guilt that once chained them. It burns away the belief that love requires suffering. Because now they see the deeper pattern that every empath who attracts a narcissist is not cursed, they are called. Called to awaken, called to remember their power, called to understand the anatomy of manipulation so deeply that they can never again be deceived by it. You were never meant to stay in that dynamic. You were meant to outgrow it, to transcend it. The narcissist's weapon was never your compassion itself. It was your unconscious use of it. Once compassion becomes conscious, it becomes strength. Once empathy meets awareness, it becomes mastery. And the narcissist, who depends on confusion, guilt, and chaos, cannot survive in the presence of mastery. So, you stop fighting them. You stop explaining. You stop needing closure. You simply rise. Because clarity itself is your closure. And when you rise, when you stand in that new energy, calm, clear, untouchable, they feel it. The control evaporates. The manipulation collapses. Their tactics no longer work because you are no longer the same. You've evolved beyond the reach of emotional games. Your compassion now has edges. Your love now has intelligence. Your boundaries now have grace. This is not bitterness, it's balance. You haven't lost your light, you've refined it. You haven't stopped feeling, you've started choosing. You haven't hardened, you've clarified. And that clarity is terrifying to those who thrive in confusion. Because your silence now says everything their manipulation cannot handle. I see you, I understand you, and I no longer need to fix you. That's when the power returns home, to the empath who once believed love meant endurance, to the soul who once mistook compassion for self-sacrifice, to the light that now knows you cannot heal darkness by dimming yourself. You heal it by embodying consciousness, by being the one who can feel everything yet choose peace anyway, by showing through presence what no amount of words could teach, that compassion without awareness destroys, but compassion with awareness transforms. The empath who once was weaponized becomes untouchable, and in that untouchability, they finally understand they were never the victim of the narcissist. They were the awakening of their own power. And once you realize that, once you see how your empathy was never your weakness but your initiation, something irreversible happens inside you. You stop bleeding for the unready. You stop explaining to the unwilling. You stop trying to convince the blind to see. You understand that your sensitivity was never meant to be a leash. It was meant to be your compass. This is the point where the empath becomes something else entirely. No longer the emotional caretaker of chaos, no longer the audience for another's performance. They become consciousness embodied. Every lesson, every betrayal, every manipulation now becomes a map that leads not back to the pain, but through it to truth. Because the empath who sees through illusion becomes dangerous to the narcissist, not through aggression, but through indifference. Not through revenge, but through radiant clarity. The narcissist feeds on attention, on the energy of emotional engagement, whether love or outrage. But when the empath detaches, when they no longer flinch, defend, explain, or react, the narcissist's supply collapses. Their control crumbles in the light of your neutrality. That neutrality is not coldness, it's sovereignty. It's the space where compassion and self-respect coexist, where you can see someone's pain without letting it rewrite your peace. Jung called this integration the merging of the conscious and unconscious, the reconciliation of shadow and self. For the empath, integration means understanding that darkness exists in everyone, including you. It means realizing that compassion must begin with boundaries. It means learning that saying no is not rejection, it's recognition of truth. You begin to see that the narcissist's power was never real. It existed only in your participation. Their manipulation depended on your empathy being unguarded, your compassion being unquestioned. But now, awareness guards the gate. Love still flows, but it no longer leaks. You start to move differently in the world. Your silence becomes deliberate. Your attention becomes sacred currency. Your energy becomes a sovereign state. Not everyone gets a visa. People feel it when they're in your presence. There's something in your eyes now, not hardness, but knowing. A calm so steady it makes chaos tremble. A light that doesn't reach outward to be seen. It stands firm, demanding truth from everything it touches. And those who are still unhealed, those who thrive in manipulation and confusion, they can't stand it. Because your energy reflects what they've spent their lives avoiding. You've become the mirror they cannot distort. You've become the silence that reveals their noise. You've become the awareness that exposes their act. This is why awakening feels like isolation at first. Because you no longer resonate with a frequency of dysfunction. You no longer mistake pity for purpose. You no longer confuse emotional labor with intimacy. You begin to realize that love, when stripped of illusion, is often quiet, and that quiet can feel foreign after years of chaos. But this solitude is sacred. It's not emptiness, it's recalibration. It's your energy reorganizing around truth. It's your compassion detoxing from codependency. In that space, you rediscover what compassion really means. It's not saving others at the cost of yourself. It's not absorbing their pain so they don't have to feel it. It's the ability to witness suffering without losing presence, to hold space for pain without feeding it. Real compassion is surgical. It sees clearly and acts precisely. It doesn't react, it responds. It doesn't enable, it enlightens. And when your compassion evolves into this kind of clarity, you become unmanipulable. Because manipulation feeds on unconscious empathy, the kind that feels responsible for everyone's emotions. But the conscious empath knows responsibility ends where self-awareness begins. You can care without carrying. You can love without losing. You can forgive without forgetting. You now understand that empathy was never meant to make you a servant. It was meant to make you a seer, to help you read energy, discern intention, and guide others by example, not by sacrifice. The narcissist taught you this in the most brutal way possible. They showed you where your compassion ended and your self-abandonment began. They showed you how easily love can be twisted when it lacks self-respect. They showed you what happens when you give more than someone is capable of receiving. And for that, in time, you stop hating them, because you see the truth beneath their mask. They weren't powerful, they were starving. They weren't superior, they were hollow. They weren't in control, they were terrified of being seen. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's what this dynamic did. It forced you to meet your own unconscious. It made you see the shadow side of empathy, the savior complex, the fear of abandonment, the addiction to approval. And when you faced that shadow, when you integrated it, instead of denying it, your compassion transformed into wisdom. You no longer give to feel valuable. You give because you are valuable. You no longer forgive to avoid conflict. You forgive because your peace is non-negotiable. You no longer love to heal others. You love to honor truth. That is the difference between an empath who suffers and an empath who leads. One reacts to emotion. The other channels emotion into awareness. You see now that empathy is not a feeling, it's an intelligence. It's not something soft and sentimental. It's precise, discerning, and deeply aware. It can tell the difference between someone's cry for help and their pattern of control. It knows when to listen and when to leave. It knows when to hold space and when to protect it. And when you embody that, when you become both compassionate and conscious, you radiate a frequency the narcissist cannot manipulate. They can't guilt you anymore, because guilt doesn't govern you. They can't provoke you because peace doesn't react. They can't withhold love because you've stopped outsourcing it. You have become self-contained, self-sustaining, self-defined. And in that self-containment lies the end of their power. Because what they seek cannot be taken from you anymore. It was never outside you to begin with. That's the irony of it all. The narcissist's weapon was never stronger than your compassion. It only worked when you forgot its source. But now, you remember. You remember that your empathy is divine not because it bends, but because it sees. Not because it yields, but because it understands. Not because it saves, but because it transforms. You've moved from rescuer to revealer, from victim to visionary, from mirror to light. And when the empath becomes light, pure, conscious, unshakable, the narcissist has nowhere left to hide. Their illusion dissolves. Their performance collapses. Their power vanishes. Because the truth always exposes the game. And compassion, when rooted in awareness, is truth. So now you walk through the world differently. You give without fear. You feel without drowning. You love without losing. You forgive without forgetting. And most of all, you see clearly, completely, fearlessly. That is your evolution. That is your mastery. That is what happens when the empath's compassion, once weaponized, becomes wisdom. Because in the end, the empath doesn't defeat the narcissist by fighting back. They transcend them. They evolve beyond their reach. They become the calm that no storm can touch, the awareness that no illusion can survive, and that quiet, unshakable power is the ultimate revenge. And so the story ends not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with awakening. The empath stands where they once fell, not in triumph over another, but in mastery over themselves. Their eyes no longer search the horizon for understanding. Their heart no longer bends under the weight of unreciprocated love. They have walked through the fire of manipulation, through the labyrinth of guilt and gaslighting, through the endless cycles of almost, and have emerged as something unrecognizable, not hardened, but illuminated. They understand now that compassion is not submission. It is sovereignty. It is the quiet authority that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to forget it. It is the power to love deeply while standing firmly. It is the ability to forgive without returning, to understand without enabling, to feel everything without losing yourself inside it. The narcissist never understood this. They mistook kindness for weakness, humility for inferiority, and empathy for control. But what they called weakness was your strength restrained. What they called fragility was your spirit choosing peace over power games. And what they tried to weaponize has become your armor. You see, every empath's journey with a narcissist is not a punishment, it's a pilgrimage. It is the sacred trek into the underworld of the human psyche, where illusion burns away and truth emerges bare. You were not destroyed by that experience. You were initiated by it. It broke open the shell of naive compassion and revealed the diamond of conscious love underneath. It forced you to see that love without self-awareness becomes bondage, and empathy without boundaries becomes suffering. Now, you no longer give blindly. You give wisely. You no longer confuse potential with reality. You no longer mistake your reflection in someone's pain for destiny. You no longer chase healing in others, you are healing embodied. You've become the rarest kind of soul, the one who can walk into darkness and not absorb it, but transmute it. The one who no longer reacts to manipulation, but witnesses it from stillness. The one who doesn't need to prove worth through pain, because worth was never lost, only forgotten. This is what true power looks like. It's not loud. It's not vengeful. It's calm. It's unbothered. It's the type of power that doesn't need to announce itself because it is. Now, when people approach you, they can feel it before you speak, that gravity of someone who knows themselves. Those who once would have fed on your light now flinch under it. Those who vibrate with truth are drawn to you effortlessly. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer plead, you emanate. You no longer explain, you embody. Your compassion has become sacred. Your silence has become language. Your energy has become your boundary. And your peace, your precious, hard-earned peace, has become your home. You understand now that every act of betrayal was an act of revelation. Every manipulation was a mirror showing you where your love still needed to mature. Every heartbreak was a reminder that your heart, no matter how broken, still beats with truth. You have not lost your empathy, you've refined it. It no longer leaks, it leads. It no longer absorbs chaos, it creates clarity. It no longer tries to heal what refuses to change. It stands as living proof that change begins within. And perhaps this is the final lesson, that the empath's compassion was never meant to save the narcissist. It was meant to awaken the empath. It was meant to pull you through the fire so you could remember that love, in its purest form, begins and ends with self-respect. So when you look back now, you don't see a battlefield. You see a classroom. You see sacred instruction written in the language of experience. You see that every too much, every too sensitive, every too forgiving was a seed of wisdom waiting to bloom into discernment. And it has bloomed magnificently. You no longer carry the wound, you carry the wisdom. You no longer fear the darkness, you understand it. You no longer chase love, you are love anchored, conscious, whole. The empath's compassion is no longer a weapon in the hands of the narcissist. It is a force of creation in the hands of the awakened. It builds, it blesses, it transforms, And as you walk forward, light steady, gaze unflinching, heart unguarded, yet indestructible, you know this. No one can ever use your goodness against you again. Because now, you see with the eyes of awareness, you love with the wisdom of boundaries, and you live with the freedom of truth. The war is over. The lesson is complete. And what stands now, what breathes where the brokenness once was, is not just an empath. It is consciousness made human. It is love made aware. It is you whole, untouchable, and finally, profoundly free.